Anyway, meanwhile, there's news tonight that the president is attorney general about the attorney general. The Washington Post is reporting that President Trump talked recently with Jeff Sessions, his own chief of staff, actually, about replacing Sessions as attorney general. According to people briefed on the conversation, the signal that the president remains keenly interested in ousting his top law enforcement official. Susan, he seems to get the biggest kick out of torching this little guy. I mean, he openly trashes him. He's now leaked the fact, probably, that he's been talking to the chief of staff of the guy he's about to fire. He talks. Lindsey Graham seems to be feathering the nest for this to all happen after the election.
And Lindsey Graham, I'm sorry, and Jeff Sessions keeps on going. And that's the most shocking part, actually, is that he just says, say what you're going to say, do what you're going to do. But Donald Trump, the fact that he loves that story. He went to his chief of staff. He tries to undercut him because Donald Trump is about taking down people. That's what he likes to do. That's where he gets his own strength from. Do you ever see him supporting someone, except for maybe Nikki Haley, because he's afraid of her?
Yeah.
And what she can do.
Tell me about that. Why is he afraid of Nikki Haley?
Because she's one of the most successful high-level women in his administration and is leaving and could be a potential challenge to him.
You think she will?
No.
I'm hearing no from Jason.
No,
you people know
she's
how
not
to read
gonna
people's
challenge
minds.
him.
I'm not quite able to read minds yet.
Well,
you say she may run?
I think she may run. Now, it's more likely if President Trump decides not to seek re-election, which is still on the table.
She'll take on Mike Pence.
I don't think Mike Pence may be too damaged as a result of Donald Trump to.
He'll run again. Don't worry.
But she would have she would be more likely to have Donald Trump's base than Mike Pence would.
Yeah. Well, Jason, you're no-knowing here.
Yeah. No. Like Nikki Haley's not running in 2020. Donald Trump is running in 2020. And I've said before, she would not be a particularly effective candidate across the country. She has no record to run on in South Carolina. And while there are some religious conservatives who'd be happy with it, the rest of America would look at the poor education, the lack of health care, the restrictive abortion laws, her absolute failure when it came to the assassination of 9 people at Mother Emanuel Church. Nikki Haley does not have a national record to run on. And anyone who thinks because she did a nice job for 18 months in D.C. that that's going to work in Ohio and Texas and California hasn't been paying attention to what the rest of the country really wants when it comes to change.
I'm sorry, do we not say this about Donald Trump in 2015?
All right.
I didn't say that about Donald Trump in 2015.
Nikki Haley right now currently has the same constituency as Marco Rubio did. It's professional Republicans and activists and columnists and people on op-ed pages.
Exactly.
It's not meaningless, but that's where it is right now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.